I was sitting in my usual armchair, the one with the faded fabric that my husband George bought 40 years ago, having my breakfast when I heard the screaming. It wasn't the first time that Man, my son-in-law Archie, had raised his voice inside my house, but that day, with the typical summer heat burning outside, something inside him simply exploded. He came down the stairs like a madman, dragging my daughter Florence by the arm, and began pouring out all his pent-up frustration. He said he couldn't deal with so many problems anymore, that life was impossible, that he had to work too hard, that nothing was worth it. And then, in that decisive moment, he looked at me with such raw, brutal contempt that even today I can still feel the remnant of that gaze running down my spine. I'm not taking care of this old woman anymore. My house isn't a nursing home. She's here eating food from my table, drinking my water, even breathing my air. She should be in an institution, far away from here. He said it loud enough for even the neighbors to hear. I stayed quiet and didn't show any reaction. I just kept drinking my coffee, because at 72 years old, I had already learned that not all suffering deserves tears. But Florence, my daughter, didn't stay silent. She yanked her arm away from him as if she'd touched hot coals, and in a movement I had never seen in my entire life, raised her hand and slapped him across the face with all the strength she had. The sound of the slap was as loud as his screaming before. "Get out!" she yelled, her eyes filled with fury and tears. "Get out of my house! Leave now!" Archie tried to argue back, but Florence wouldn't let him. With the scissors from the kitchen, the ones we used to cut fruit from our backyard, she walked to his room and tore up every piece of clothing of his she could find. The shirts, the pants, even the shoes were left in shreds. And as she tore them, she screamed wildly, in a way I had never heard before. "This is how you teach a man to respect a mother. This is how." In that instant, I understood that my daughter had learned something very important from me, even though I had never said it in words. She learned that some things are non-negotiable: dignity, respect, and the value of the person who gave you life. To understand why that moment was so explosive, I need to take you back with me. I need to tell you who I am, where I come from, and why my daughter reacted in such a visceral way. I was born in a small town. My mother, Agnes, was a woman who worked from sunup to sundown, washing other families' clothes in the river so that my siblings and I could eat. I never had much, but I received something no money can buy: the example of a mother who never gave up. My father abandoned us when I was 5 years old. He simply disappeared one early morning, leaving only debts and bitter memories. My mother could have given up. She could have abandoned us to an orphanage, as some mothers did back then, but she didn't. She learned to do the possible and the impossible to raise us. She sacrificed her own dreams so that ours could exist. And when she grew old, when her eyes could no longer see the seams she sewed, it was my duty, not an obligation, but a privilege, to care for her as she had cared for me. I grew up seeing the nobility in those worn and calloused hands. I saw the determination in every wrinkle on her face. And when I turned 18 and met my George, a hard-working man who sold lumber at the town market, I already knew exactly what kind of family I wanted to build. I wanted one where life was honored, where those who came before us were respected, where love was measured not in beautiful words, but in daily acts of sacrifice and loyalty. I had my Florence when I was 22. She was born in a small room, with a midwife and my mother by my side. I remember holding that child in my arms and making a promise that she would grow up in a world where family dignity would never be negotiable. And I kept that promise every single day. When my George fell ill and needed expensive medicine, I sold what we had. When Florence needed books for school, I cleaned houses before dawn to get extra money. I taught my daughter by example that a child doesn't abandon their mother. That respect for parents is not optional. That family is a human being's last refuge in this world, and if you lose that, you lose everything. So when Archie gave that bitter laugh and that indifferent look, he wasn't just disrespecting an old woman. He was disrespecting everything I had taught my daughter. After Archie left that house, humiliated, with his clothes torn, Florence locked herself in her room and cried. She cried from anger, she cried from regret, she cried because she knew she had destroyed a marriage, that her children, my grandchildren, would have to deal with the consequences of that decision. And me? I remained in that armchair, watching my entire life pass through my mind, thinking about all the things we have to sacrifice to have peace. The neighbors saw everything. In a neighborhood where news travels faster than the wind, soon the whole street knew that Florence had thrown her husband out of the house. Some people judged her, of course. They said she was overreacting, that a couple doesn't separate because of a moment of anger, that she should have tolerated it in silence to keep the family together. But you know what I learned in those days? That people only understand what you're going through if they're in your shoes. What they didn't see were the years before that day. They didn't see Archie coming home and ignoring me, denying me food, mistreating me with words and actions. They didn't see when he came into the house, saw me preparing food, and said he wouldn't eat anything I had touched because old women are filthy and contaminate the food. They didn't see the way he never offered to help me when I had trouble carrying something heavy, the way he whispered things to Florence when I walked by, things that were clearly about me. Florence suffered in silence for years. I heard her cry many nights in her room while I prayed in mine, helpless, because a mother can't force her daughter to leave a man who was hurting her. But that day, she put an end to it. The last straw wasn't just the contempt for me. It was the way he said all of it, as if I didn't deserve to be respected, that I should be in a nursing home and not here, in my own house, with my own family. Archie tried to come back a week later. He sent messages, apologized, cried. Florence considered it. I saw in her eyes the desire for reconciliation, because she still loved him, because they had children together, because forgiveness is a luxury we can't always afford ourselves. But then she came into my room, hugged me and said, "Mom, if I take him back now, what message will I be sending to my children? That it's acceptable to humiliate people? That contempt can be cured with an apology?" And in that embrace, I understood that my daughter had grown up. She hadn't just defended me. She had chosen her principles. And sometimes that comes at a high price. Sometimes it even costs a marriage. I'm here at 72 years old, sitting in this same armchair, and I want you to know something it took me a lifetime to learn. Disrespect starts small. It's not born from a shout and cruel words. It's born from the silence of those who see it happen and do nothing. It's born when you allow someone to trample your dignity to keep the peace. It's born when you choose comfort over truth. And once you allow that first act of contempt, it grows like a weed until it takes over your entire garden. I'm not here to say she did the right thing, because life isn't as simple as right and wrong. She did what was necessary. She chose truth over comfortable lies. And yes, it destroyed a marriage, but it also saved something far more precious, my daughter's peace against an abusive man. And you, who are listening to me, I want you to know that your life is also worth something. Your dignity has value. Respect is not a favor someone does for you, it's something you deserve just for existing. If you're in a place where you're humiliated, where you're belittled, where you're treated like a burden, leave. Because life is too short, too precious, and you were made for so much more than surviving in the shadow of someone who doesn't know your worth. This is the legacy I leave. Not of an old woman sitting in an armchair waiting to be humiliated, but of a woman who saw her daughter put into practice everything that previous generations taught. And that, my dear, is immortal. That is forever.